My name is Gabriel Walsh. We're originally from Liskeavy, Milltown, now living in Ratesh, Kilconnelly. My father was involved in the 16 to the 1921 War of Independence. Now, he was involved, with the Belmont battalion, but that really didn't take off, the Belmont Company. He joined it in 1917, and the captain of that particular company was a Patrick Walsh. And he said the company, there was about 35 strong men in it, but they held meetings once a week and after working hours, and they did foot drills, and they didn't do really much with the arms drill. So at the time there was a strong Sinn Féin club in the parish of Milltown in 1917, and the principal man in that Sinn Féin club was a Thomas Lyons of Knock, Milltown, and a Matthew Concannon of Russellstown. Now, he was a member of the club and he took an active part in its work. They did everything in their power to have a Sinn Féin candidate elected at the general election in 1918. They organised transport. He said they were mostly sidecars. And they were pleased that a Dr. Brian Cusick, the Sinn Féin candidate, was elected with a good majority. He said there was nothing exciting about the election campaign in the Milltown area. There was no clashes with the RIC, he said, and there were no arrests. Now, he helped, he said, with collections in the Dáil loan. So the volunteers were the driving force, he said, behind that collection in the area. And a good many subscribers paid a fiver, which at the time was a lot of money. Now, the loan, he said, met with great success. And at this time, they organised football matches, he said, to raise funds for Sinn Féin. And he said they put up the tricolour to keep the spirit of the people. Were always very prominent at meetings, football matches, and the national flag was flown very high from telegraph poles, he said, buildings and high trees. He said it kept the RIC very busy, taking them down. So at the 35 millionaire in the Belmont Company, all farmers' sons, he said, they had guns of their own, he said. He said raids were bought in about, he said raids were made and they got about another 15 shotguns and a big supply of cartridges. Most people who had guns handed them over willingly. He said there was the odd one was a bit sour about it, but nobody refused, he said, outright. That was the late 1990 now, or early 20s. They had no rifle in the company, he said. And he said he remembered about March or April of 1920, Michael Morden, the battalion commandant, had visited Belmont Company and gave instructions that plans should be made without delay for an attack on the Milltown RIC barracks. But at the time, the garrison was very small, he said, in comparison with what it was in 21. There were 2 sergeants, he said, and 37 constables. And there was very little done by the way of carrying out the instructions. And about the middle of the 1920, Captain McHugh resigned, and Patrick Brennan of Liskeavy then became captain. There was no change in the lieutenants, he said. And Brennan resigned from the captaincy in March in 21, and he took no part in voluntary activities after his resignation. Patrick McHugh likewise took no part either after his resignation in the middle of 1920. So I think they had a meeting then, and what happened was, I think they left the company in Belmont, and only 4 of them walked out. There were John Patrick McCormick, Dan McCormick, who was later shot in Headford and lost his arm and his leg and died as the consequences of it. Peter Brennan and himself. And they were all from the village of Liskeavy. So they all left that night and they transferred to the Milltown Company. Now, the Milltown company was about 40 strong, he said, and Thomas Fearock was the company captain, and the lieutenants were Patrick Burke and John Thornton. And Michael Quinn, he said, was the company lieutenant, and Thomas Donlan was the company QM. In less than a week after leaving Belmont, volunteers John Patrick McCormick, Dan McCormick, Peter Brennan, and himself attended a meeting at the Milltown company. And it was decided at that meeting to collect all the information possible regarding the movements of the RIC patrols from the Milltown barracks and to attack a patrol at the first opportunity. Now, the Milltown IQ was a very reliable man. Its name was Michael John O'Donnell, and he owned a public house in Milltown. It was about 20 yards from the RIC barrack. A further meeting of the company was called and held on the 1st of April in 21. And he said there was almost about 100% attendance. So Captain Fearock informed us that he got information from Michael O'Donnell regarding the timing of the patrols. And at that meeting, it was decided to attack one of the patrols. So the attack took place between the barrack and the railway station at Milltown on a Saturday night, the 17th of April. And he said that they also decided to attack them on their return from the railway station to the barracks. I remember the date, he said, very well, because I was at the market in Tuam that Saturday, which was 2 days after the fair in Claremorris, which was held on the 15th of April. So they took up the positions roughly 150 yards from the RIC barracks on the first bend of the road at the northern or Ballandine side of the village of Milltown. And there were 11 officers and men all from the Milltown company. They were all armed with shotguns except for one member of the party who had a revolver. The usual number of the RIC in patrol between the village and the railway station was 6. They were disappointed that only 2 came. It was about 10:30 p.m. They opened fire and the men fell. They did not move after falling, and I think they were pretty near the barracks, and there was about 150 yards away, so they had to withdraw across the fields in the direction of Millbrook. And from there to Irishtown and across into Roscommon, about 8 miles from Milltown on the following Monday. We contacted the Tuam flying column, the Tuam Battalion flying column in the village of Ballinstack, and we heard that they were thought at the time that the attacks were dead or were seriously injured. He never heard afterwards whether they died or not. So that was one of the attacks. Now they had another attack as well oh yes, he said he gave the list then of names of the officers and the men at Milltown company who took part in the attack. There was Captain John Thomas Fearock, First Lieutenant John Thornton, Second Lieutenant Patrick Burke, Company QM Thomas Donlan, and the volunteers were Martin Slattery, Peter Burke, John Patrick McCormick, Dan McCormick, Peter Brennan, Michael Donlan, and Patrick Walsh. A second attack on the RAC station in Milltown took place on the 27th of June, 1921. Now that attack, the Milltown company learned that a party of 4 RICs had left the village, and they sent out 2 scouts to report their movements to the Tuam Battalion flying column, which was at the time in Carraray, less than a mile from Milltown. So they took up the positions in the junction of the Kilconnelly Milltown and Tuam Milltown Road. The IRA position occupied a frontage of about 40 yards on the Milltown side of the junction, and quite close to it. It would be about 300 yards from the RIC barracks at the centre of the village. The attacking party was at one side of the road on the left-hand side, and as you go from Milltown in the direction of Tuam, they were placed just inside the fence of the road. And the RIC patrol came in the direction of Kilconnelly, and they rounded the bend. They opened fire on them, and all 4 fell. one crawled over the fence, he said, of the road. Crossfire order was given, and the battalion, Thomas Dunleavy and volunteer Dan McCormick, stepped up on the fence to investigate the position. We thought all of the patrol 4 were dead. They thought they were all dead or badly wounded, but immediately they came under fire from the RIC barracks. So they had lights, and they had very lights, he said, set up in the barracks, and the machine gun fire was opened on their position by the garrison. So they had no chance but to withdraw, and they went through Russellstown into Roscommon again. The Thomas Dunleavy QC from the Tuam Battalion was in charge of the RIC patrol. So I think one of the other, I think 2 of them were killed, Sergeant Martin, he said, and a Constable Day. And the following officers who took part in that second attack were Thomas Dunleavy, Tuam Battalion, Thomas Ryan, Tuam Battalion, Thomas Nohely, Tuam Battalion, a Patrick McHugh, Captain, Cylon Company, a Timothy Dunleavy, Captain, Bernard Company, a Thomas Fearick, Captain, Milltown Company, and volunteers Martin Slattery, Dan McCormick, John Patrick McCormick, Peter Brennan, Peter Burke, and Patrick Walsh. And he said that he would like to pay tribute to the 2 scouts, Company QM Thomas Stanlon and volunteer Lawrence O'Sullivan, who went cross country, traced the movements of the patrol, and reported in good time on the route they were taking. Now, my father certainly didn't talk too much about what went on in 1921 or 1917 to 21. And he certainly didn't get involved in the Civil War. He felt that it shouldn't have happened, really, the Civil War. It should not have happened. So he left for America. Now, he also said they had some enemies in the Milltown Company. He said in the year 1921, a letter was captured in a raid, he said, on the mail in Clarendon, County Galway, carried out by the IRA. And this letter, written by a resident in the Milltown Company area, was addressed to the RIC in Galway City and contained a list of names of the most active members of the IRA in the Milltown area. Now, he also wrote that he said he was not in charge. He said, but if he was in charge, he would certainly have taken action against that person who wrote that letter. But he said, you know, he said he thought like that it was a very mean act to do, to report people that were trying to help the country, like, and help Milltown maybe, or on the surrounding area, like. So that was about it now, Pauline. He didn't really talk much about the activity in you know, that was about his active, we'll say, in Milltown. But he was not happy when he was in Belmont for some reason or other, and that's one of the reasons why he left. He said they just, you know, they weren't active enough in Belmont, and they had a strong company in Belmont, like 35 men, like. So that's about all I can tell you at the moment, Pauline, anyway. So,
like, did he ever talk to you about activities, say, that aren't recorded in the witness statements?
Well, yeah, there were some things like in Liskeavy itself, like the one hiding place they had for their guns and ammunition was a reek of turf at the back of our house. That's where they used to hide the guns. And like the RIC or the Black and Tans, like, often visited Liskeavy and raided houses and burnt houses, actually, you know, but there was no men. They were men. The young men at the time had been gone, like, had been left. But we found actually a grenade or two. He was very much afraid of because, you know, we'll say from when he came back from America in 1932, 33, he there'd have been some grenades around the place, like, so he had them buried in the walls, like down the fields. So we found, actually, as young lads, we found a couple of them, like, and he was really worried. Now they had gone rusted. I remember at one stage there was one found in John Patrick McCormick's in Liskeavy, and the army was called out to disarm it. But we did find a grenade or two ourselves, but he took them, and I don't know what he ever did with them. I'd say he buried them. Do you know what I mean? Now, they did capture a gun, himself and John Patrick, from the Milltown barracks, John Patrick McCormick, and they carried it up to Liskeavy. And that gun now, well, it was in Tuam, in that museum in Tuam, but I think that was taken and it's in Galway now. It was a small little cannon gun. But other than that, no, he really didn't talk. You know, he kind of kept it to himself, and he didn't really say much about what the activities that went on. He was that kind of a man, like that. He didn't, you know. But he said there were plenty of spies in Milltown that would give information to the RIC. No, he never mentioned any names. He certainly never mentioned their names now. But I know in that one piece there, where that letter that was intercepted, and he said, you know, there was a few of them in the company, they were not happy. And he was certainly a prominent, I'd say, a prominent Milltown man that wrote that letter. But he didn't give his name.
There's an interesting snippet in J.P. McCormick's witness statement where he speaks of an execution of a prisoner in Clonberne, and McCormick and your father brought the prisoner to a priest before his execution. Yeah. Do you know any more about this?
Well, he did mention that, all right. He said that your man was a spy and he was taken out, and they, himself and John Patrick McCormick, brought him to the priest, and he was executed in a quarry afterwards. But that's all. Like, there was no, he didn't give a name. Actually, I think maybe he had been up in Gordon's in Kilclooney. I think he might have worked up there or something. I think there was a mention of that at the time.
And can you tell me about your father's early life, like when and where he was born?
Oh yeah. My father was. He was born in the 12th of July, 1899 at Liskeavy in the parish of Milltown, and he attended Kilgevern National School until he was 14, and then he went to work on his father's farm in Liskeavy. He didn't go to school after 14, because most of his age group, we'll say, they left, if they had a farm, they left school at around 14 and they went working in the farm, or they either that or they immigrated. And he joined the Belmont company in 1917. So he'd be at, we'll say, he'd be about 18 when he joined the Belmont company.
And do you know how he became interested in the cause for Irish independence?
Well, I'd say a lot of men in Liskeavy, like there was a big there was a lot of volunteers in Milltown at the time, and I'd say they talked to him and kind of convinced him that he should get involved. You know, now my father had a brother that was never involved in John Walsh. He was never involved in the War of Independence, and his sister Annie, she went to America at a very young age, and actually it was her that brought him out there. Now, she did come home on a few occasions. Actually, I met her. I remember Anna, the sister, at home. I barely remember her now. She died in 1958. So I was only 5 at the time when she died. But I do remember one thing about her funeral, and it was the most unusual at the time. She was taken from the house on the morning of her burial and brought to the church, and then brought to Kilgevern, where she's buried. That's the only thing I can remember about her. You know, she she certainly wasn't involved in any activity in the War of Independence, I'd say.
And what year did your father die?
He died in 1983. Now he has medals, all right. My brother John actually has them in Shannon. He has 2 medals from the War of Independence, and the tricolour. My sister has it actually in Kilgivern, Mary Kelly. The tricolour that was put over his grave in Kilgivern, or over his coffin, sorry. And the army were there, and they fired a battalion of shots over his grave in Kilgivern in 1983. I remember that.
Now, do you think your father would like that we are talking about him now 100 years on from the war and his involvement in it?
Oh, he wouldn't mind. He wouldn't mind. Like he wouldn't be a man that'd be, that would, yeah, he'd be an outgoing man. Do you know what I mean? Like he went to America, like, and he worked there for, I'd say maybe 8 or 10 years, like, so he would have known, a lot of people, like, and met a lot of people in his time, like, and, so he'd be a fairly active man, like. That's about his life now. He came back in 1932 and he met his wife, my mother. She was Hare from Kilgivern, Nellie Hare, and Hare we call them. And they got married, and that's about it. He built a house in Liskeavy, and he did a bit of farming, and that was it. He was 84 when he died.